Welcome back to the Culture Desk, and if you've got a pulse in the rap world right now, buckle up, because the Drake situation just took another turn nobody saw coming. Drake is back in the headlines, and this time it isn't a leak, it isn't a subliminal, it isn't a ghost tweet from a burner account. This time it's a receipt war, and Drake is the one standing in the middle of it looking like he forgot the internet keeps screenshots. Lefty Gunplay just stepped forward with proof, and Drake, whether he wants to admit it or not, is caught in a story he swore never happened. Let's crack this thing wide open, because the whole thing smells off, and once you see the timeline, you'll understand why the West Coast is laughing at Drake right now. Rewind with me. Back in April of 2024, long before the world knew that Kendrick was about to reshape the map of modern hip-hop, Lefty Gunplay sat down for an interview and casually dropped a line that most people slept on. He said Drake had reached out. He said Drake's management had tapped in with Solless, the CEO of OTR Records, trying to lock in a record with him. And back then, Lefty wasn't picking sides. He was neutral. He said shout out to Drizzy, he said shout out to Kendrick, he said his city is LA, but he isn't dissing anybody. That was the Lefty Gunplay of early 2024, a rising West Coast artist with buzz, momentum, and the whole industry watching. And Drake, being Drake, saw the temperature and moved on it. That's been the Drake blueprint for a decade. Find the artist with heat, put a hand on the shoulder, get the cosign photo, and lock in the collab before somebody else does. That's not a secret. That's not a theory. That's the Drake operating manual, plain and simple. But then something happened that flipped the entire chessboard. Kendrick dropped G-Nex with zero warning, and buried inside that album was a feature that changed Lefty Gunplay's life forever. That eerie, hypnotic, unforgettable outro on TV off, the crazy, scary, spooky, hilarious chant that had every corner of the internet chanting it back, that was Lefty. Kendrick handpicked him. Kendrick put him on the biggest surprise album of the decade. Kendrick made him a Grammy winner. And overnight, Lefty Gunplay went from a name in the Whisper Network to a name every A&R in America was hunting. Pay attention to this part, because this is where Drake's story starts to unravel. Once Lefty landed on G-Nex, his tone shifted. The neutral, both sides Lefty of April 2024 was gone. In his place stood a Lefty who said, on camera, without hesitation, that he would never do a record with Drake. Not now. Not later. Not ever. He said Drake had already reached out. He said he could have gone with Drake, he could have gone with anybody, but he chose the West. He said Kendrick picked him out of the whole world, and that kind of loyalty doesn't get traded for a check. That's a direct quote, and that quote is on tape, and that tape has been circulating for over a year. Drake knew about it. Everybody knew about it. Nobody hid it. Then, quietly, about a month before G-Nex even dropped, Lefty posted a screenshot. A tiny little breadcrumb that told the whole story before the story was public. Drake had liked one of Lefty's Instagram videos. Champagne Papi himself, hovering in the notifications of an LA rapper he supposedly never cared about. That like sat there in public for anybody to screenshot, and screenshot it they did. Now the puzzle locks in. Fast forward to this week, and here's where the whole thing goes sideways. Adam22, yes, that Adam22, hops on his podcast with Whack 100 and casually says he was texting Drake about something unrelated, and while he had him on the line, he decided to ask the question everybody's been curious about. He asked Drake straight up, "Is it true Lefty Gunplay turned down a song with you?" And according to Adam, Drake fired back with a line that got the whole timeline howling. Drake allegedly said, "Why would I ever want to do a song with Lefty Gunplay?" Let that sit for a second. Because that response isn't just a denial. That's a demolition attempt. That's Drake trying to erase a receipt that already exists in public. That's Drake trying to rewrite the timeline in real time, hoping the internet has a short memory. But the internet doesn't have a short memory. The internet has a hard drive. Here's where it flips. Lefty Gunplay saw the clip. Lefty Gunplay saw Adam22 broadcasting Drake's alleged denial to 1 million viewers, and Lefty Gunplay did what any artist with the truth on his side would do. He surfaced. He posted receipts. He reminded the world about the Instagram like. He reminded the world about the outreach through Solless. He reminded the world that his own management, on a separate podcast, had already walked through the whole thing step by step. Solless had gone on back on Fig, a platform tied directly to the TD ecosystem, and detailed two separate approaches from Drake's camp. The first came right after TV Off exploded. The second came right after the Grammys. Both were declined. Both times, Solless said the reason was the same. They didn't want to be a paid prop in a war they had no interest in fighting. Read that reason again, because that's the part Drake fans keep skipping. They didn't decline because they hated Drake's music. They didn't decline because they thought Drake couldn't help their career. They declined because they knew exactly what the outreach was. It wasn't a collaboration attempt. It was a strategic move. It was Drake trying to peel off a piece of the West Coast the same way he tried to peel off the Bay Area with Too Hard for the Radio. And yeah, we have to talk about Too Hard for the Radio, because that record is the missing puzzle piece that explains why Drake is even in this position. On that track, Drake didn't just fire at Kendrick. He fired at Mustard. He targeted the producer who built Not Like Us, the producer who anchored the entire West Coast coalition, and he tried to use Bay Area allegiance as a wedge. For a hot minute, it kind of worked. DJs got confused. Fans got split. The narrative wobbled. Drake had found a soft spot in the coalition, and he leaned into it. So when you hear that Drake's producers were pinging Lefty Gunplay's team twice, once after TV Off and once after the Grammys, you don't need a decoder ring to understand what the play was. The play was division. The play was infiltration. The play was to fracture the coalition from the inside. Hats off to the researchers who caught this early, because if Lefty hadn't kept his receipts, this story would have been buried under Drake's denial and Adam 22's amplification. But Lefty kept everything. And once he dropped that reminder about the Instagram like, the whole narrative snapped back into focus. Drake wasn't just interested in Lefty. Drake was watching Lefty. Drake was in his notifications. Drake's producers were reaching out. And Drake, allegedly through Adam 22, wanted us to believe none of that ever happened. Nah, we're not doing that today. Here's the part where it gets a little murky, and this is why the receipts matter so much. There's a real question about whether Drake actually said what Adam 22 claims he said. Adam 22 has an ongoing beef with the Back on Fig camp. He has a separate ongoing tension with Lefty Gunplay himself. So there's a version of this story where Adam 22 fabricated or exaggerated the quote just to poke both of his enemies at once. That's possible. That's not unlikely. That's actually pretty on brand for Adam 22's business model. But even if Adam 22 made the quote up, here's the uncomfortable truth. Drake hasn't publicly denied Adam 22's version. Drake hasn't corrected the record. Drake hasn't come out and said, "Hey, Adam misquoted me, delete that." Drake's silence is its own kind of confession, because in the celebrity ecosystem, silence in the face of a spreading narrative is the same as endorsement. And if Drake really did say it, if Drake really told Adam 22 that he'd never want to do a song with Lefty Gunplay, then that's an even worse look, because Drake is admitting he got turned down. Drake is admitting Lefty rejected him. Drake is admitting he tried and got the door shut in his face. Nobody with a functioning ego confesses to a rejection on a podcast unless they're trying to control the damage. And Drake, whatever else he is a strategist. He knows what he's doing. He knows what admissions look like when they're dressed up as denials. Now let's talk about what Lefty Gunplay actually is, because context matters. Lefty Gunplay is not some random SoundCloud rapper. Lefty Gunplay is an LA institution in the making. He's the guy Kendrick Lamar chose to close out TV Off. He's the guy who stood on stage at the Grammys next to Mustard and Solless holding a trophy that had his name on it. He's the guy who turned down six figures, in cash, on the table because he refused to be used as a prop in somebody else's chess match. That's not a small artist. That's a made man. That's someone with the kind of loyalty capital that money literally cannot buy. So when Drake, allegedly, tries to make it sound like Lefty is beneath him, the whole hip-hop world reads that for exactly what it is. It's not a flex. It's a cope. It's Drake trying to look untouchable while standing on the receipts of his own outreach. Here's the part one need you to understand about the bigger picture. Drake didn't lose the battle with Kendrick because of one song. Drake didn't lose because of Not Like Us alone. Drake lost because Kendrick built a coalition, and coalitions are stronger than solo superstars. Kendrick has Mustard. Kendrick has SZA. Kendrick has TD. Kendrick has The Bay. Kendrick has LA. Kendrick has Compton. Kendrick has Lefty Gunplay. And every single one of those alliances is a wall between Drake and the West Coast market Drake needs to reclaim in order to feel like himself again. That's why Drake's reach-outs to Lefty aren't random. That's why the timing lines up perfectly with post-TV off and post-Grammys. Those are the two moments where Lefty was at his most visible, his most valuable, and his most symbolically important. Peel off Lefty, and you crack the coalition. Peel off Lefty, and you send a signal that the West Coast unity Kendrick built is fragile. Drake understood that. Drake played that hand. And Drake got told no twice on the record with witnesses. And now that everybody knows, Drake wants us to believe it never happened. Let's not forget the human element, because underneath all the strategy and all the receipts, there's a real story about a real artist choosing loyalty over leverage. Solless said it best. He said they're men of value. He said they'll get the money on their own. He said even for a six-figure bag, they weren't going anywhere near Drake's camp. That's not a diss. That's a philosophy. That's a signal to every young artist watching that there are things in this industry more valuable than a viral feature. And in a business built on chasing the next check, that kind of stance is genuinely rare. Meanwhile, on the other side of this story, we've got Drake, arguably the biggest name in modern rap, allegedly pulling strings behind the scenes, running plays that his fans don't want to admit are plays, and then denying the whole thing when the receipts hit the timeline. That's not the confident superstar image his team spent a decade building. That's something smaller. That's operating on a whole other level of small. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because Drake's silence right now is louder than any statement he could make. If Adam 22 lied, Drake could kill it with one Instagram story. If Lefty lied, Drake could drop the truth in a freestyle. If the receipts were fake, Drake's team could shred them in a single press release. But nobody's doing any of that. Nobody on Drake's side is stepping to the mic to clean this up. And when silence is the strategy, the audience always reads it as guilt. That's not opinion. That's how narrative works. Here's where it flips one more time. The truly interesting angle of this whole saga isn't Drake or Lefty. It's Adam 22. Because Adam 22 is doing something very specific here, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Adam 22 has a media empire that runs on friction. Friction with Back on Fig. Friction with Lefty's camp. Friction with Whack 100's rotating cast of guests. And by dropping this Drake quote, whether it's real or invented, Adam 22 hits three targets at once. He gets Drake to react. He gets Lefty to react. He gets Back on Fig to react. Every one of those reactions turns into clips. Every one of those clips turns into content. Every one of those pieces of content turns into revenue. That's not commentary. That's arbitrage. Adam 22 is running a media arbitrage business, and this whole cycle is the exact fuel his machine needs. Which brings us right back to Drake, because Drake, of all people, should know better than to feed Adam 22's machine. And yet, allegedly, he did. So what's the takeaway from all of this? What's the story you tell your friends when they ask you what actually went down between Drake and Lefty Gunplay? The story is simple, and it's ugly, and it's real. Drake tried. Drake got told no. Drake tried again. Drake got told no again. Drake tried to erase the whole sequence from public memory. And Lefty Gunplay, holding a stack of receipts, quietly reminded everyone that the internet doesn't forget. That's the whole story. That's the entire arc. Drake wanted the feature. Drake didn't get the feature. Drake pretended he never wanted the feature. Lefty pulled up with the proof. Coalition holds. West Coast holds. Kendrick holds. Drake keeps looking for a soft spot in a wall that clearly doesn't have one. And if you're wondering why this matters beyond one rejected collab, here's your answer. Because every one of these little stories, every one of these micro battles, is a data point in the larger war for cultural authority. Drake used to be the guy who could pick any artist off the shelf and turn them into a moment. Now Drake is the guy getting turned down by artists who used to be dying for a cosign. That's not a small shift. That's a tectonic one. That's the sound of the culture rearranging itself in real time. So the real question isn't whether Drake called Lefty. The receipts already answered that. The real question is how many other artists are quietly saying no to Drake right now, and how long can the champagne facade hold before somebody louder than Lefty pulls back the curtain? Petty. Bizarre. Loud in the exact way Drake doesn't want to be loud right now. Drop your take in the comments, because I already know some of you think Adam22 made the whole thing up, and some of you think Drake absolutely said it, and some of you think Lefty is fumbling his own leverage by not dropping every single receipt at once. Whatever your read is, put it on the record, because this story isn't finished. There's another chapter coming. There's always another chapter with Drake. And when it lands, we'll be right back here, breaking it down piece by piece, the way we always do. If this video hit for you, do me a favor. Hit the like button. Tap subscribe if you haven't already. Ring the bell so you don't miss the next one, because the receipts season is nowhere near over. I'll catch you on the next breakdown. Stay loyal to the truth. Stay loud in the comments. Peace.